about it is this: we can't fix this next session. This is 10 years. This will last for a decade.
Texas is again at the center of anti-democratic moves to suppress the vote. Despite communities of color spurring Texas's population growth in the last decade, the state's new congressional maps brazenly decreased the number of Hispanic and Black-majority districts. Late last night, the Texas legislature approved new gerrymandered maps that protect Republican incumbents who have seen their districts turn competitive and also limits the influence of voters of color. The new maps decrease the number of Hispanic majority districts from 8 to 7 and leaves 0 Black majority districts, while white majority districts, on the other hand, grew from 22 to 23 districts. After the release of 2020 census data this year, Texas became the only state to add 2 new House districts. This is because of an explosion of population growth, and 95% of that growth came from communities of color. But as the Texas Tribune writes, Republicans placed a new district in the Austin area to capture Democratic-leaning voters that were endangering the prospects of Republican incumbents in nearby districts. They also drew a new district that would offer Republicans safe territory in the Houston area. In both districts, white residents would make up more than 60% of eligible voters. One positive bit of news is that Congresswoman Sheila Jackson Lee will not have to face off with Congressman Al Green in a primary after lawmakers placed Lee back in her original district and left portions of Green's district intact. Joining me now to discuss is Texas State Democratic Executive Committee member Jen Ramos. Ms. Ramos, thank you for joining me tonight. Civil rights groups have already filed federal lawsuits seeking to prevent the state from using the maps. They say they violate Section 2 of the Voting Rights Act. What is your response to the passage of the maps and the lawsuit filed against them?
Well, for starters, one thing that we need to acknowledge historically is that since the inception of the Voting Rights Act, the state of Texas has actually never had maps that have met the limitations or the qualifications for the Voting Rights Act, which means that every census since the inception of the Voting Rights Act, we have faced litigation for racially discriminatory maps. And so I think it is adequately called for that we would be facing some of these issues in regards to the way that the maps were passed. In particular, looking at some of the amendments that were made in the middle of the night, we are seeing there were representatives, in specifics, conservative members who were choosing to not only racially gerrymander certain areas, but focus on diluting the voices of color. Case in point, with the results of the 2020 census, we see that white Texans and Latino or Hispanic Texans virtually make about the same amount of population. However, we're seeing that white majority districts represent 60% of the representation in Texas, whereas Hispanic and Latino districts only will represent 18% of representation, which is virtually opposite of what the general population reflects based on the 2020 census.
So what rationale do Republicans give for this? Because on its face, you can see that it is racial gerrymandering. So how do they kind of negotiate it away?
And a lot of this comes from what they are willing and able to say in testimony. As I previously mentioned, we have not faced any maps in the state of Texas that have not gone to court. And so more often than not, they are very aware that anything that is said, whether it's made in an amendment, whether it's said in testimony, or whether it's said on the floor of the House or the Texas Senate, that it will be faced in litigation. And so they have been very specific to avoid the use of the phrase racial gerrymandering or racial district representation. Case in point, the chair of the Senate Redistricting Committee, Joan Huffman, was very specific in mentioning that when the maps were drawn on the Senate side, they did not look at racial representation, whereas Todd Hunter, the chair of the House Redistricting Committee, was very cognizant of the district representation and the lack of diversity in these maps. And so I don't necessarily believe that they have a cohesive plan and how they've been trying to pass this for what it is, but I think one of the other parts of the conversation that we're not having is the way that Texas politicians try to pass everything in the middle of the night behind closed doors. This is not uncommon. This is not unheard of. The way that we actually pass these maps is in the third special session we've had. Essentially, the state of Texas has been in the legislative session for about 200 days or so, and that's not normal by Texas standards. Texas usually has a part-time legislature that only meets for 134 days every other year. So we are catching Texans who would have been able to otherwise give their testimony or provide their insight on the maps that they would have and the districts that they would live in, being caught completely off guard because of the rushed nature of how they pass these maps. This is in comparison to the 2010 census, where we actually delayed our primary because we did not pass maps until several months after the release of the census data. So we are seeing a very rushed process and a deliberate effort to dilute the voices of color and hamper as many people in congressional districts. A lot of the maps you can look at are very blatantly incumbent protection.
You can't really organize your way out of this. You can't really even sue your way out of this. You really need federal legislation to prevent this from happening. Do you believe that the Biden administration's response to an engagement on voter suppression is sufficient?
I don't believe that we are doing everything that we could. That's not to say that there are not more imperative issues in the world. For example, Texas is a state where our energy grid has not been fixed. We are a state where we are facing a immigration crisis. We are facing so many other problems in the state of Texas that it almost seems offensive that that was the response that we received, that we just have to work harder and organize. If you consider the general populations that live in the state of Texas, the county of Harris, which is the city of Houston, has a population that is larger than the entire state of Rhode Island. How do you out-organize an area just in that type of massive population in one major metropolitan city? In case in point, you also look at the University of Texas in Austin, and the population of that college campus in itself would be comparable to a suburban city such as Pflugerville, which is 45 minutes to an hour away from the city of Austin, or the city of New Braunfels. And it seems frustrating to be told that we need to just organize harder, when the reality is the odds are stacked against you. The state of Texas has had conservative rule and conservative legislators since the 90s. Since the rule of Governor Ann Richards, we have had a Republican majority in the House, in the Senate, and all statewide offices. This leaves us at a severe obstacle. Well, this is also the reason why House Democrats broke quorum for the voting omnibus bill, which was Senate Bill 1 that was faced in the earlier special sessions. And them taking their lives, their careers, their families, and going to Washington, D.C. to lobby for voting rights reform and reform on election maps that we knew we were going to face in redistricting, only to fall on deaf ears, sends a message to Texans that we are being forgotten. And I would hope that that's not the case, but I know that we can do more.
Jen Ramos, thank you so much for joining me tonight. I really appreciate it.